It started with a knock, not the polite, hesitant kind you might expect from a stranded traveler, but a loud, frantic pounding that echoed through the house like a cry for help. I was alone in my family's cabin, deep in the mountains, where snowstorms weren't just common, they were relentless. The power had gone out hours ago, leaving me with nothing but candlelight and the eerie whistle of the wind. I wasn't expecting anyone. No one could have made it this far in the blizzard, but someone or something was out there. I hesitated, my breath visible in the freezing air, as the knocking grew more insistent. Against my better judgment, I approached the door, peering through the frosted window. At first, I saw nothing but white, the storm swirling like a living thing. Then, a figure emerged, a man, shivering violently, his face pale and eyes wide with desperation. He didn't look dangerous, just off. His clothes were old-fashioned, tattered, and covered in snow. I couldn't just leave him out there. When I opened the door, the man stumbled in without a word, collapsing onto the floor. I shut the door quickly, locking out the biting cold. He looked up at me, his expression a mix of gratitude and something I couldn't quite place. Fear? "Thank you," he muttered, his voice hoarse. I helped him to a chair by the fireplace, throwing another log onto the dying embers. I found every inch of him pour the grass from my feet and deepening my murmurs. "Are you lost? How did you get here in this storm?" He didn't respond right away, just stared into the fire with hollow eyes. Finally, he said, "I've been walking for a long time, too long." His words sent a chill down my spine. Even in the warmth of the fire, something about him felt wrong. His clothes, his demeanor, even his presence, it all felt out of place, but I brushed it off. Maybe he was in shock. I offered him some water and a blanket, but he refused. "You shouldn't have opened the door," he said suddenly, his voice low and trembling. My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't answer, just stared at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "They'll know I'm here now," he whispered. Before I could ask what he meant, the power surged back on, flooding the room with light. That's when I saw it. The man's reflection in the window wasn't right. While he sat motionless, staring at the fire, his reflection was turned toward me, his head tilted unnaturally, its mouth stretched into a grin far too wide for a human face. I stumbled back, my heart racing. "What are you?" I demanded. The man, or whatever he was, turned to face me, his expression blank. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to bring them here." Before I could respond, the knocking started again, louder this time, more frantic, as if multiple fists were pounding on the door at once. I froze, my eyes darting to the locked door. The man stood slowly, his movements jerky and unnatural. "You have to let them in," he said. "No," I stammered, backing away. "Who's out there?" He didn't answer, just kept walking toward the door. I grabbed a fire poker, holding it like a weapon. "Stay back." The man paused, turning to look at me with those lifeless eyes. "If you don't let them in, they'll take you instead," he said, his voice unnervingly calm. The pounding on the door grew deafening, the entire cabin shaking with the force of it. I didn't know what to do. My instincts screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go. The storm outside was a death sentence, and whatever was at the door didn't sound human. Suddenly, the man lunged for the door. I reacted without thinking, swinging the fire poker and connecting with his arm. He let out an inhuman scream, a sound that seemed to vibrate through my skull. His skin where I hit him split open, but instead of blood, A dark, viscous liquid oozed out. I stumbled back, horrified, as the man fell to the floor. The knocking stopped. For a moment, there was silence, save for the crackling of the fire. Then the man began to laugh, a low, guttural sound that didn't belong in this world. "You've already let them in," he said, his voice distorted. The lights flickered, then went out completely. The room was plunged into darkness, save for the faint glow of the fire. I could hear them now, whispering, moving, not outside, but inside the cabin. Shadows danced on the walls, shapes that didn't match the furniture or my own movements. I clutched the fire poker, my hands trembling as the whispers grew louder. The man, or whatever he had become, crawled toward the fireplace, his body twisting unnaturally. He turned to me, the two of us, moving faintly in the firelight. "It's too late," he said. "They're here for you." The shadows surged toward me, enveloping the room in complete darkness. I swung the fire poker wildly, but it was useless. The whispers turned into screams, and I felt icy hands grabbing at me, pulling me into the void. When I woke up, I was lying in the snow outside the cabin. The storm had passed, and the sun was rising. The cabin was gone, replaced by an empty field of untouched snow. My car was parked nearby, its engine still running. I drove home in a daze, trying to convince myself it was all a nightmare. But the bruises on my arms, the scratches on my skin, they were real. And every time I close my eyes, I hear the whispers, growing louder, waiting for the next storm. I should have stayed home that night. The weather service had warned of an unprecedented blizzard, but I thought I could make it through. My car was sturdy, my tank full, and my confidence, as always, too high. By the time I realized how wrong I was, it was too late. The road was gone, buried under a suffocating white abyss. My tires slipped, my wipers froze, and my headlights barely pierced the thick wall of snow ahead. And then, just as I thought I might freeze to death in my car, I saw it. A faint glow in the distance. A cabin. My salvation. Or so I thought. The walk to the cabin felt like an eternity. The wind tore at my face, and the cold seemed to seep into my bones. When I finally reached the door, I knocked as hard as I could, but no one answered. I tried the knob, and to my surprise, it opened easily. The warmth inside hit me like a wave of relief. But the place was strange. It looked lived in, with a fire burning in the stone fireplace and a pot of something steaming on the stove, but there was no sign of anyone. My first thought was gratitude for shelter. My second was unease at the eerie silence. The cabin's interior was old-fashioned but cozy. Wooden furniture, plaid blankets, and shelves lined with books gave it a rustic charm. Still, something felt off. The storm outside seemed impossibly loud, and the shadows in the corners seemed to shift when I wasn't looking. I chalked it up to exhaustion and sat by the fire, letting its warmth thaw my frozen limbs. That's when I noticed the pictures on the mantel. The photos were of a family, a man, a woman, and a little girl. But in every single photo, the faces had been scratched out. The scratches were deep and violent, as if someone had taken a knife to the images. My stomach turned, but I told myself it wasn't my business. Maybe the cabin owner had a reason. Maybe it was just an old, forgotten relic of someone else's tragedy. I should have left right then, but the storm outside was unrelenting, and I had nowhere to go. As I explored the cabin further, I found more unsettling details. A rocking chair in the corner moved slightly, though there was no draft to push it. The walls had faint scratches, almost like claw marks, etched deep into the wood. And then there were the sounds, soft creaks and faint whispers, just on the edge of hearing, as if the cabin itself was alive. I tried to ignore the unease and focused on the basics. I found a blanket and wrapped myself up, settling into an old armchair near the fire. But as I drifted into an uneasy sleep, I had a vivid dream. Or maybe it wasn't a dream at all. I was standing in the snow, staring at the cabin, but it wasn't the warm refuge I had entered. The windows were dark, the door hung open, and a shadowy figure stood just inside, watching me. I woke with a start, heart pounding. The fire had burned down to embers, and the room was icy cold. The storm outside had grown even worse, the wind howling like a living thing. But what really set my nerves on edge was the door. I had locked it when I came in, but now it stood wide open, letting in a bitter draft. I grabbed a fire poker and crept to the door, my breath visible in the freezing air. Snow had blown in, but there were no footprints leading in or out. It didn't make sense. I shut the door and locked it again, double-checking this time. As I turned back to the room, I froze. The rocking chair was now facing me. I tried to convince myself it had always been that way, that my mind was playing tricks on me, but deep down, I knew better. The air in the cabin felt charged, heavy, like I was being watched. I decided to stay awake for the rest of the night, but exhaustion got the better of me. When I woke again, it was still dark. The storm hadn't let up, and the cabin was silent. Too silent. I checked my phone, hoping for a signal to begin the next day. I swore I charged it before leaving. Then I noticed something even more disturbing. The pictures on the mantel, the scratched out faces, were now completely blank. I backed into the corner, gripping the fire poker like a lifeline. That's when I saw them, the family from the photos, or what was left of them. They stood at the edge of the room, their features distorted and wrong. The little girl stepped forward, her hollow eyes fixed on me. She opened her mouth, but the sound that came out was not a child's voice. "You shouldn't be here." The room plunged into darkness, and the whispers turned into deafening screams. I felt hands, cold, skeletal hands, grabbing at me, pulling me toward the center of the room. I fought with everything I had, but the force was too strong. The last thing I saw before I blacked out was the little girl's face, inches from mine, her mouth stretching into an impossible, toothy grin. When I woke up, I was in my car, parked on the side of a road. The storm had passed and the morning sun was rising over the snow-covered landscape. I looked back, expecting to see the cabin, but there was nothing there, just an empty stretch of forest. I told myself it was a hallucination, the result of exhaustion and cold. But every time I close my eyes, I see that family waiting for me in the dark, and sometimes, when it's quiet, I can still hear the whispers. It was the worst winter storm of the decade. The roads were covered in the thick blanket of snow, and visibility was near zero. I'd made the decision to drive through it, thinking I could handle it. That was a huge mistake. The storm was relentless, and after hours of driving, I found myself lost in the middle of nowhere. That's when I saw it, the lights of a cabin, in the distance. What I didn't know then was that it would be the last place I'd ever want to be. I pulled into the driveway of the cabin, exhausted and desperate for shelter. The storm was growing fiercer by the minute. My breath was visible in the freezing air, and I was shivering uncontrollably. I knocked on the door, hoping for help. But there was no answer. The door was ajar, so I let myself in, thinking the worst I could face was a grumpy homeowner. But when I entered, I froze. There was no one inside, and yet it felt like I wasn't alone. The cabin was sparsely furnished, dimly lit by a few flickering lights. The cold air hit me like a brick wall, even though the fireplace was lit. As I glanced around, I noticed something odd, a family portrait on the wall, but the faces were scratched out. My stomach churned. Something felt horribly wrong. I decided to leave, but the storm outside had worsened, and the wind howled as it battered the cabin's walls. I tried to call for help, but my phone had no signal. The isolation was setting in, and the fear crept up on me. That's when I heard it. The soft, unmistakable sound of footsteps from upstairs. My heart pounded in my chest. I grabbed the nearest object, a rusted old lamp, and slowly crept toward the stairs. Each step I took seemed to echo louder than the last. I was about to turn around and leave when the footsteps stopped, followed by the creaking of a door opening. Whoever or whatever was upstairs knew I was here. I took a deep breath and continued up the stairs, my hand trembling. As I reached the top, the air grew colder, and I could see my breath in front of me. There was a door at the end of the hallway, slightly ajar, and through the crack, I could see a dim light flickering. I knew I had to check it out, but I didn't know if I was ready for what I would find. We made it through. I pushed the door open slowly, my heart in my throat. Inside was a bedroom, but it didn't look like any room I'd ever seen. The walls were covered in strange symbols, written in what looked like blood. The bed was unmade, and the sheets were torn, as if someone had been violently dragged across the room. But what made my blood run cold was what I saw on the floor. Footprints, fresh footprints, leading out of the room and toward the stairs. I turned to leave, but before I could move, I heard a voice, soft but unmistakable, whisper from behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. I turned to leave, but before I could move, I heard a mouse sighing. I looked up at the floor. The footsteps that followed me told me I wasn't alone. I rushed down the stairs, my mind racing. I had to get out. I had to escape. But as I reached the door, I found it locked. Panicking, I ran to the windows, only to find them all sealed shut, as if they had been boarded up from the inside. My breath came in short gasps, and the reality of my situation hit me. I was trapped. The temperature dropped even further, and I could hear the wind outside howling louder than ever. My only option was to go back upstairs, find a way out, or pray the storm would let up. But just as I turned toward the stairs, I saw it. An old wooden chest in the corner of the living room. I had missed it earlier. Something about it drew me in. I couldn't explain why, but I felt like I needed to open it. I approached the chest slowly, my hands shaking as I touched the rusted latch. With one deep breath, I lifted the lid. Inside, there was a small, yellowed book. It was bound in what appeared to be animal skin, and the pages were brittle and torn. I opened it cautiously, and the first thing I saw made my stomach lurch. A drawing of a cabin with hollow eyes, sweating breath, I opened it cautiously. In the drawing, there was a shadow made my stomach lurch. It was a photograph of a dark, huge cabin waiting to reach the bottom. A chill ran through me as I flipped through the pages. The book was filled with disturbing drawings and strange symbols, each page more unsettling than the last. As I reached the final page, I found a name, The Forgotten One. Below it, a message scrawled in ink, "He who enters will never leave." I slammed the book shut, but the floorboards beneath me creaked. My blood ran cold as I realized someone or something was standing behind me. I turned around slowly, but there was no one there. The air grew thick, the temperature dropping to an unbearable level. I could feel an icy hand on my shoulder, and I whipped around, but still, nothing. The whispers started again, louder this time. I had to get out. I grabbed the book and bolted toward the door, but as I reached for the handle, I felt the walls close in around me. The door wouldn't open. The whispers turned into guttural growls, and I felt the presence of something dark, something ancient behind me. With one last desperate push, I threw myself against the door. The wood splintered and the door flew open, but what I saw outside made my heart stop. The storm had stopped. The snow had stopped falling. The world outside the cabin was pitch black, but the cabin itself was surrounded by a dense, impenetrable fog. No roads, no signs of life. It was as if the world had forgotten this place existed. I ran, but the fog seemed to follow me, closing in around me, suffocating me. The footsteps behind me grew louder, and I knew, deep down, that I wasn't meant to leave. My legs began to feel heavier, as though something was pulling me back toward the cabin. The whispers turned to screams, and I stumbled, collapsing to the ground. When I woke up, I was back inside the cabin. The fire was still burning, but everything else was different. The walls had changed, the windows were gone, and there was no way out. And that's when I understood. The cabin wasn't just a place, it was a trap. And now it had claimed me. No one ever found me. My story, like the countless others before me, was lost to the winter winds and the fog that clung to the old cabin. If you ever find yourself driving through a snowstorm and see a cabin in the distance, stay away, because once you enter, you'll never leave.